had a summer job when I was a 15-year-old girl that was a few miles from my house. I lived in a rural wooded area, and my parents never let me go into the woods by myself. But they worked days, and my job started at noon every day, so I had to walk to work. I chose to disobey them and walk to the woods anyways instead of the road because, well, it cut about a mile off my walk. So, every day at the same time, I'd walk through the very much abandoned state forest down a deer path for a mile or so until it intersected a railroad track. Then I'd walk a couple more miles down the railroad tracks into town to do my job. Stupid, I know, but I was 15. Taking this path always freaked me out, and I always felt like I was being watched. But it was shorter and less sunny and less hot, so I ignored my instincts, thinking my parents' influence was just making me paranoid. My parents would pick me up after my shift, unaware of my daily routine. This continued for weeks. One day, I'm walking about a mile from any houses, deep in the woods, and there are two porn magazine pages that had been ripped out and placed on the trail facing me. They hadn't been there the day before. I was completely creeped out, as they were clearly intentionally placed and probably meant for me. Since very few people actually use this area, but I kept walking because if I turned around at this point, I'd have further to go back and get out of the woods, and then there was also a huge hill I'd have to climb to get back to my house. And no one would be around to help me anyways. This was a densely wooded area with brambles and dogwood and rolling hills, so I couldn't see very far in any direction. Suddenly, though, I could hear someone else walking close by. I stopped and heard them for a split second, and then they would stop. They sounded like they had change in their pockets, so I knew it wasn't an animal. But because of the echo, I couldn't tell where the sound was actually coming from. Just to check that I wasn't crazy, I stopped once more and heard the same noise, which quickly stopped when I stopped. That's when I knew I was being stalked. My heart was racing with fear and my vision went blurry, but my instincts told me not to speak and not to run. Just keep walking down the dense deer path further into the woods. My gut told me not to look behind me. I could sense there was someone right behind me on the deer path, but I did not look back. Now, I'm a rather short, slightly chubby person, always have been, and looking at me, you'd probably assume I couldn't run very fast. So if you wanted to catch me deep in the woods, you might assume you had plenty of time to do so. Looking back, I think that is exactly what this creep was thinking, but back then, I ran cross-country and track and could run a 7-minute mile. The hills, they were my specialty. I always placed really well on hilly terrain. By no means was I a great runner, but I was certainly likely faster than whatever creep was hanging out in the woods stalking a little girl. I wasn't processing this at the time, though. I just instinctively knew not to run. Not yet. I kept walking seemingly deeper into the woods because I knew the train tracks were up ahead where there would be a lot more space to run without tripping or getting caught in the tree branches. It was terrifying not to look back, but something told me not to. While I walked, I felt like my entire body was shutting down. It's a feeling I've never felt before or since that day. It was the feeling of being prey. Everything went blurry and I could feel blood pulsing in my ears and my heart was pounding. I just kept walking like nothing was happening and did not turn around. But I could feel someone maybe 5 or 10 feet behind me, following me for a good 1/8 of a mile or so. I didn't turn around, I didn't scream, because I knew no one would hear me. As soon as I got nearer to the train tracks, which were elevated along a man-made gravel mound, I ran. I ran on all fours up the hill, gripping weeds to pull myself up faster, and then sprinted along the tracks as fast as my lungs and legs could carry me. I heard and saw branches snapping below me in the woods, but now I was out in the sun and the woods were just getting darker, so I couldn't see what was behind the branches. I just kept sprinting. I never even saw the person, but I knew their intentions were awful. I never cut through those woods again, and I didn't mention what happened to my parents until I was 18 and had already moved out of the house. I was simply just too afraid of being grounded. Crazy, I know. This happened about 13 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl. And they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town one night and try to scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You would turn off a busy main road flooded with strip malls and restaurants, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. This area was very heavily wooded, essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees, very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off the main road and drove for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees layered behind it. We all got out to see exactly what this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk in single file to avoid getting hit by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods and couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. Besides, the whole point of being out here was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What could we possibly come across that could take us all down? We headed down the trail for another 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came upon a massive clearing. And I really mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkept grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey man, check that out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house about several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and I saw this old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. But because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on the far end of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. By dancing, I mean they were skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark that it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the hell is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they just stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked out and ran back to the trail. Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream. I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk in the woods had taken about 20 minutes or so, we made it back to our 2 cars and were peeling out, a lot closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over to get out and check in and just kind of make sure that what we saw actually happened. My heart was pounding and I knew everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all friends still, living in different states yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, and everything in between. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text that says something to the effect of, "The woods, man. That really happened, right?" And it most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. And the thing that still resonates with me about that night is, whoever that was, they were dancing in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly at a group of young adults. Not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around to see what he was truly capable of. First of all, let me start off by saying that this story is from almost 30 years ago when I was a kid. I've told very few people about it, as I never felt like anyone would believe me. Like a lot of kids in the 90s, I was hanging out over a weekend with a close friend of mine, and just staying at home with him and his family. We lived in rural Virginia, and he lived in a small town like I did. We spent a lot of time riding 4-wheelers and exploring the nearby woods across a soybean field. One weekend I was visiting, and it snowed an average amount for Virginia, about 4 to 6 inches. We were beyond excited to take the 4-wheelers out of the field and tear it up a little. After we got bored of that, we parked at the edge of the woods and walked in a ways. Now, we had been in these woods quite a bit and had seen a lot of things. There was a lot of old equipment and even old rusted out cars spread throughout the area of the forest. Being teenagers, we thought this was really cool and would often go check them out. That day, we decided we were going to start building a fort near the debris. I often carried a small hatchet when we were riding trails in case a smaller tree had fallen across our path. I walked back to the 4-wheeler and I grabbed it, then started to chop down a smaller tree to use as the base of our wall. For the life of me, I could not find another tree of the right size after that. So I started walking around the area without my friend. It was then that I stumbled across a rotting deer carcass. This didn't bother me. Growing up in rural Virginia, friends and family were hunters, and I had eaten my fair share of venison. However, I noticed that the deer had what appeared to be claw marks on it. Was this the prey of another animal that hadn't finished its meal? What animal was actually capable of catching a deer out here in this forest? I went to get my friend and show him the carcass, and he was as puzzled as I was, but we just let it be. I returned to building the fort. As I was using some rope to tie two of the smaller trees together, something caught my eye about 50 yards off. What I saw was a silhouette of a person. However, it was rounded off and blurry, almost like what you would see in a comic book or video game indicating an unknown character. Startled, I simply yelled, "Hey!" at it. It then darted behind a tree. I was now very much aware that we were not alone. I yelled for my friend and he came walking over. I let him know what I had just seen and he laughed it off. As he was laughing, I stood up from my squatting position and saw the same shadow over his shoulder, no more than 10 yards away. I screamed and immediately took off running for the field, yelling at him to follow me. I could hear him following me as his footsteps grew closer. Then I heard his footsteps grow farther away. I turned and looked, and he had split off into a different path. At that point, I really didn't care and just kept running. I reached a large ditch that was roughly 5 feet deep and jumped across it in a panic. I later discovered how far of a jump that was and have no real idea how I cleared it. As I reached the field and got out of the woods, I saw my friend standing about 30 yards down the tree line. Hunching over and breathing heavy, I checked behind me and saw nothing as I started to walk towards him. I asked, "You saw that, right?" To which he responded, "Why do you think I'm out of breath?" We jumped on the four-wheelers and headed back towards his house without saying a word. When we got back, I asked him what he saw because I wanted to know if it was the same thing I had seen. He described it perfectly. We tried to talk to our parents about it, but they kind of just laughed it off and said, "Guess you better not stay out in those woods anymore." He had an idea. We were going to go talk to his grandmother, who lived a couple of blocks away and had lived in the town her whole life. We simply asked her if she had heard anything strange about those woods. She then began to tell us about an old sawmill that had exploded back in her time. She said what a tragedy it had been and that nearly everyone had lost their life. This explained the old equipment. This explained the old cars rusting out. They had cleaned up all the major parts of the accident, likely just the dangerous parts though, and left the rest. We then told her our story, to which she smiled and told us that people don't realize we aren't alone in this world. Absolutely horrified, we left. Neither one of us has ever returned to those woods. My hand axe is still back there, and I had terrible dreams for years about this incident. And still some 30-some years later, I have the occasional dream about it. I don't know what we ran into that day, and I'm certainly not going back to check. This happened back in the fall of 2016. I live in a very small and rural community where everyone knows everyone. The state allows rifle deer buck hunting during the first week of October. Sustenance hunting is very important in the culture of my area, and this fall, I was lucky enough to have drawn a buck tag. I had made plans to hunt on my grandmother's farm that evening. Given that I'm a smaller woman, I had asked my husband to come with me in case I killed something and just needed help packing it out. However, he could not go due to work obligations. Fine, no problem. I've hunted this farm many times by myself and know it like the back of my hand. I strapped on my boots, grabbed my rifle and binoculars, and then tucked my cell phone into my pocket and made my way to our Jeep. My grandmother's farm consists of cornfields bordering on alfalfa fields along a river. Between the river and the farm are lines of old growth trees, the perfect place to fill a buck tag. I parked my Jeep about a mile upriver from the fields, then began walking along the tree line towards the area where the deer had mostly been feeding. At the opposite end of the field, there is a large haystack where all the harvested alfalfa is stored. As it came into my field of view, I felt the hair stand on the back of my neck. I knelt down and looked through my binoculars. I could see a very tall, large man walking briskly towards me from beyond that haystack. I knew for a fact that I was supposedly the only one hunting this farm that night, as I had just spoken to my grandmother. Something inside me said I needed to get out of the area as fast as I could. I initially tried to turn around and walk back down the tree line to my Jeep, but given my short legs, this man was quickly closing the gap. He was still several hundred yards from me, so I decided to try to cross the river instead. I found that the river was too muddy and deep to cross safely. My only option seemed to be to try to get a signal on my cell phone. When he walked across a small ditch and disappeared from my line of sight, I quickly darted into the corn and kept quiet. I could hear him walking closer and closer, and I desperately tried to call my husband. Back then, the closest cell towers were over 30 miles away, and cell service was extremely spotty at best. I could not connect to my husband or 911. By this point, the man was already within 100 yards of me, and I could hear him ripping corn stalks out, stomping around and loudly cursing, "Where the hell did you go?" On top of everything else, it was getting dark quickly. I definitely did not want to be alone in the dark with this man. I watched him for a few minutes and was able to determine that he did not have a gun. After weighing my options, I decided to step out and see if I could de-escalate the situation. I work in healthcare and deal with unstable individuals regularly, so I stepped out of the corn. "Hi, I'm sorry if I interrupted your hunt or something. I did not mean to cause any harm," I said with a calm smile on my face, making sure there was at least 80 yards of distance between us. His eyes locked with mine, and it was obvious something was off. He stood about 6.5 feet tall. His clothes were absolutely filthy, stained with what appeared to be his own waste and sweat. His shirt was torn and had dried blood on it. His face was crooked as if he had suffered a stroke, and he slurred his words. "There you are," he yelled. He reached down and grabbed a massive stick, at least 5 feet long. He could have easily killed me with it. I stood my ground, grabbed my rifle from my back, and pointed it at him. He stopped. We looked at each other for a moment before he began yelling, "Do you know whose farm you're on?" I stated, "Yeah, this is my grandmother's farm. I've hunted it my whole life." The veins began to pop out of his head. "No, this is not. My wife is hunting in this cornfield and you ruined it. Because of you, she missed a huge buck, you stupid bitch." He became so enraged he started making strange growling sounds and spitting everywhere. I was running through my options when he suddenly lunged at me. I turned off the safety of my rifle and loudly stated, "Stop. I will shoot if I have to." He froze and just stared at me for about 30 seconds before dropping the stick. He grunted loudly, his eyes darting around. "Listen, I don't want to have to do something that we will both regret. I am very sorry I ruined your hunt. If you turn around and walk away from me, I will leave," I calmly explained. I could see him thinking hard about what to do next. He finally mumbled, "Fine," and turned around, stomping back towards the haystack. My heart was about to beat out of my chest. I was not about to turn my back to this man, though. I watched until he had walked a safe distance away, and then I darted back into the corn. I thought back to how he had said that I spooked a massive buck and ruined his wife's hunt. But that didn't add up. I had a good view of the whole field, and there were no deer present. I decided to observe him through my binoculars. I watched him climb up the haystack and get into a small two-door white car. He quickly peeled out of the haystack lot. I was able to see that the car had California license plates, but nothing more. I live nowhere near California, by the way. And he was also alone. No one else was in that vehicle. I ran back to my Jeep, locked myself in, and sped home as fast as I could. I told my husband what happened. I had never seen this man in my life, and neither had my husband based on my descriptions. We live in a community of about 200 people, born and raised here. We know everyone. I called our local sheriff and they came out and took a statement. I took them to the haystack where we had parked and we found a knife lying on the ground. Of course, nothing could be done as I was not able to get a plate number or a name from the man. To this day, I still have no idea what that man's intentions were, though I could guess. It's been 8 years and I have never seen him again. I also decided from that point on that I would be hunting with a buddy.